It was a slow, rainy morning when the company-wide email arrived. The kind of morning where the office felt like a waiting room you couldn't leave. Elena was already at her desk, second mug of black coffee halfway gone, when the subject line flashed across her screen. Sparkles, let's look sharp, Team Sparkles. She didn't need to read the body of the message to know who it was really meant for. She clicked it anyway, more out of obligation than curiosity. It was from Melissa in HR, of course it was. It outlined a revised dress code, with a new emphasis on traditional weaves and visual consistency across departments. Language dressed up to sound polite, but she knew exactly what it meant. Her pressed charcoal pants, subtle patterned blouses, and polished flats weren't aligned with what Melissa liked seeing in the hallway. Most people didn't notice. Melissa always did. Elena leaned back slightly, her face calm, her hands steady. She wasn't someone who stirred things up, but she wasn't someone who bent either. She'd been through too much to waste her energy playing office politics. Half the folks in her department showed up in wrinkled chinos or ill-fitting dresses they clearly didn't care about. No one said a word to them. But when she dressed like she gave a damn, quietly and consistently, somehow that rubbed people the wrong way. The buzzing of the overhead light above her flickered again. It always did. That corner cubicle near the copier was hers, had been for years. People thought it was a demotion, a dead zone. For her it was cover. A place to think clearly unnoticed. Her job wasn't flashy, but it mattered. She handled sensitive data from defense contracts, cross-checking encryption tags and security labels the average coworker barely understood. She didn't brag about it. She just got it done. Her clearance level wasn't something she ever talked about. Why would she? It was quietly issued by the federal agency she reported to outside of her job title. The black security badge stayed tucked away in a small leather case in her purse. It was something she earned, not something she flashed. Melissa wouldn't know what to do with it even if she saw it. But lately Elena had noticed a shift. There were too many friendly check-ins from Melissa. Too many casual comments from Brenda, the clipboard-carrying assistant who always laughed too loud and asked too many questions. Your pants today are so vintage FBI, she joked last week. Elena didn't even blink. She never did. That was her strength. Steady, unshaken, clear. At exactly 10:08, the sound of sharp heels echoed down the hall. Melissa was making her rounds, perfume thick in the air behind her. Elena didn't look up until the woman's voice landed beside her desk. Elena, hey. Just wanted to check. Did you happen to read the dress code update this morning? I did, Elena replied, still focused on her screen. It doesn't apply to me. Well, Melissa hesitated, smile plastered on tight. We're aiming for a more unified appearance. Some of the older styles you've been wearing might feel out of sync, especially with high-level clients around. Brenda appeared out of nowhere, as if summoned. Yeah, like visual harmony, she chirped, clearly repeating something she'd heard 5 minutes ago. Fabric alignment sends a message. Elena finally turned her head, her tone flat. Confusing to whom exactly? I doubt the Department of Defense is worried about textured polyester. That shut Brenda up for a second. Melissa gave a polite little laugh, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. It's just important we all stay on the same page. Some people don't realize when they're pushing the line. I don't push lines, Elena said without raising her voice. I write them. And federal compliance guidelines take precedence over office fashion opinions. I'm sure you're aware. Melissa's mouth tightened. She didn't answer. She turned and left, perfume still clinging to the air. Brenda followed behind like a shadow. Elena stared at her monitor for a long moment after they left. She didn't feel anger, not yet. But she felt something shift. That familiar tickle in her gut she'd learned to listen to. She'd felt it the first time her promotion paperwork got lost. And the time she trained someone who was later promoted over her. She didn't complain then. She wouldn't now. But she was watching. She always was. Her fingers moved to her notebook. On the page titled Lines Crossed, she added a line and dated it. Fabric Games. By the time the afternoon rolled around, she wasn't surprised when the meeting request came through. No subject line, no context. Just a calendar invite titled HR Matter, scheduled for 15 minutes later, in a third-floor conference room rarely used unless someone was being let go or written up. She stood slowly, locking her computer with a click. As she passed her supervisor's office, she noticed his blinds drawn, door shut. No courage. Not even a glance. Room 3B had 3 people waiting inside. Melissa, naturally. Brenda, holding a script like she was auditioning for something. And Daniel, the operations manager, who once congratulated her on finishing a 60-page audit by saying, "You're really good at typing." "Elena," Melissa said, all fake calm. "Thanks for coming. Please sit." "I wasn't given a choice," Elena replied, taking the chair furthest from them. Brenda unfolded her paper with shaking fingers. "This is a formal meeting regarding repeated failure to comply with updated appearance guidelines and an ongoing pattern of behavioral friction." Her words came out rehearsed, mechanical. Melissa jumped in. "We've had several conversations about tone and collaboration. This morning's exchange was unproductive. Unfortunately, we've reached the point where we need to take action. Your employment is being terminated effective immediately." They slid a paper toward her across the table, printed in bold red. She read it without emotion. Nowhere did it mention her clearance, her work record, her contributions. Just vague phrases. Team dynamic, cultural tone, appearance inconsistency. "So I'm being fired," Elena said evenly. "For pants." Melissa's face twitched. "Among other things," Brenda added. "You've been warned several times." Elena laughed once quietly. "No. I've been challenged, not warned. There's a difference." Behind her, through the glass wall of the conference room, her locked terminal blinked. A blue notification was flashing. DSS system check-in. Overdue. None of them saw it. But Elena did. Melissa noticed her looking. "Guess you won't be needing that anymore," she said, trying to sound victorious. Elena stood slowly. "I'll collect my things. Wouldn't want a security breach." Melissa chuckled. "Don't be dramatic." Elena paused at the door. "You just dismissed the only person in this building who knows how to keep your government contract from falling apart." Their faces said it all, blank confusion. They didn't understand what she meant. Not yet. She left the room without another word. And as she walked back toward her cubicle with the box they handed her, too small, almost insulting, she didn't feel panic. She didn't cry. The hallway stretched out ahead of her like a long tunnel, and every step felt like she was walking toward something, not away from it. She packed quickly. Photo of her sister. Notepad of encryption logs. Her coffee mug with the phrase, "Trust but verify." But the badge, the real badge, she placed in its secure envelope, sealed it, and tucked it into her purse like it was a match she'd decided not to strike. Yet, the elevator was waiting. But so was something else. She had barely stepped into the elevator when the lobby doors whooshed open behind her with a strange urgency, one that made people look up from their phones and keyboards. Elena didn't turn around. She didn't need to. The shift in the air wasn't just about someone arriving. It was about authority entering a space that had forgotten what accountability felt like. She kept her eyes forward, her fingers gently holding the strap of her bag. The envelope with her final paycheck was creased under her arm, already forgotten. Then the silence broke. 2 people walked into the lobby. No badges, no small talk, just calm, focused movement. A man in a perfectly pressed suit. A woman with a notepad, not for show but because it actually mattered. Their shoes didn't make much sound, but somehow every step landed like punctuation. Elena saw their reflection in the stainless steel panel, next to the elevator buttons. Black lapel pins, silver rings around a small eagle. She had only seen that emblem once before, on a briefing file marked "Do Not Duplicate." DSS. Not the back-end IT team that everyone thought of when they heard acronyms. Not the compliance trainers who came once a quarter to spout off policy slides. No, these were the actual federal agents. The people who knocked when protocol was broken in a way that could cost people their security clearances, or their freedom. The receptionist started to speak, then stammered. They're both in a meeting. Can I ask what this is regarding?" The woman in the bun didn't even blink. "We need to speak with Mr. Prescott and Ms. Fields. Now." The man added without looking up. "It's not a request." Elena's breath slowed. She stepped out of the elevator and took a seat again in the waiting area, pretending to scroll through her phone. But her mind wasn't calm anymore. It was calculating. The DSS check-in she'd missed, that alert had gone out. Someone must have tried to access one of her restricted folders, or click through the partition she created for the encrypted project logs. Maybe Brenda, maybe someone from IT following a script. Either way, they triggered something. And now the consequences were here. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She waited. A few desks away, people had stopped pretending to work. Conversations died mid-sentence. The hum of the office became a vacuum, as if everyone sensed something important was happening, but didn't have the vocabulary to name it. Then Melissa walked out of the elevator with Brenda right behind her. No clipboard. No laugh. Melissa looked like someone had unplugged her. Her eyes flicked toward Elena, paused just long enough to register her presence, then snapped away like she'd touched something electric. The DSS woman turned to her. "Miss Hart." Elena stood. "Still am." The man gave a subtle nod. "We'd like to ask you a few questions, if that's all right." Elena's mouth curved into something close to a smirk. Of course. They didn't take her to the side. They didn't usher her away like she was being disciplined. Instead, they stood with her in the center of the lobby, where everyone could see that she wasn't in trouble. She was being consulted. The agents began speaking quietly but firmly. "There's been a breach related to your clearance profile. Your check-in was flagged as overdue. Your files were accessed post-termination without DSS approval." Melissa's face went pale. Brenda had already backed halfway down the hall. "Obviously," the woman said. "We're investigating protocol violations. But more importantly, we'd like your input going forward. The contract still exists. The project is still on. But the people managing it? That might change." Elena gave a small nod. Her voice was quiet. "I expected this." Agent Ross tilted her head. "Good. That helps. Because right now your former employer doesn't even understand what they've done." The elevator dinged behind them, and then came the panic. Mr. Prescott, the CEO, rushed out like someone had set a timer on his career. His tie was crooked. His forehead was glistening. He looked at Elena like he just realized the fire he smelled was coming from under his own desk. "Elena," he said, trying too hard to smile. Would you mind stepping into my office for a moment?" She didn't move. "I don't work here anymore," she said, loud enough for the 3 interns huddled near the printer to hear. "You'll have to schedule something." He blinked. "Elena, please. This is serious." "I agree," she replied, her expression still calm. "You should talk to your compliance officer." "Oh wait, you just let her go." Melissa was hovering a few feet away now, her shoulders tense. She opened her mouth, started to say something, but Agent Miller spoke before she could. "Miss Hart, you're welcome to join us. But there's no rush. You're not being reviewed. You're being invited to help clean up a disaster." Elena turned slightly. "Do I need to come now?" "Only if you want to see the moment they realize how deep they're in it." Her eyes moved to Melissa, who had gone visibly pale. She didn't look like a manager anymore. She looked like someone watching their house slide into a sinkhole. Elena nodded once. "Let's go." As the agents walked with her toward the back hallway, where a conference room door was already open, the entire floor stayed still. She wasn't flanked. She wasn't escorted. She was walking with them, side by side. Inside the conference room, voices were rising. The words floated just enough to be heard. "Unauthorized access, termination before clearance, check-in, chain of custody breach." Agent Miller excused himself and stepped in. Elena waited near the door, watching Melissa and Prescott through the glass as if they were on the other side of a decision neither of them could unmake. Then the room fell silent. Prescott sat down hard. Melissa backed into a chair, eyes wide. Agent Miller stepped out again, folder in hand. He didn't say anything, just nodded at Elena. "It's confirmed," he said quietly. "They're being pulled. The contract is now frozen." Prescott came out next. He didn't speak. His eyes were hollow, and for the first time he looked small. Melissa followed. She wouldn't meet Elena's gaze. "Elena," the CEO said finally, "let's be reasonable. We can fix this. I'll bring you back. Full reinstatement. Senior role. Title, pay bump, whatever you want." Elena tilted her head. "The amount you could offer wouldn't cover the therapy required to forget working for you." Silence. Agent Ross held out a card. "We'll be in touch soon. But if you're interested, we'd like to bring you in on the project. Not as a contractor. As oversight." Elena took the card without a word. And then she walked. No box. No speech. Just the badge in her bag, her steps steady, and her future already rewriting itself. Outside the building, the late afternoon air felt crisp in a way Elena hadn't expected. It wasn't refreshing. It wasn't liberating. It just felt honest. Like the world out here didn't pretend to be anything it wasn't. No meetings disguised as coffee chats. No smiling faces attached to knives. Just the sound of traffic, some leaves twitching in the breeze, and the low thrum of everything moving forward. She stood by the curb with Agent Ross, the card still in her hand. Cream-colored, thick paper, no job title. Just a name and a number. That alone said more than any offer letter ever could. Agent Miller had gone back into the building. He said he wouldn't be long, but something in his voice suggested this was the moment everything was going to snap. Ross didn't say much. She didn't need to. She stood next to Elena with a quiet steadiness, like someone who'd watched this exact kind of storm roll in before. Elena appreciated the silence. It let her think. She thought about how fast it had all happened. From the moment she opened the HR email to now, less than 10 hours. And yet, everything she had tolerated for months, maybe years, had finally cracked in just one day. All the sidelong glances, the smug jokes, the empty evaluations. Gone. Replaced with a single undeniable truth. She had been the backbone. And they hadn't known until it was too late. She glanced through the glass walls of the building. The lobby looked calm, but it wasn't real calm. It was that eerie quiet after something explodes, when everyone's just pretending the dust hasn't settled. She could see the receptionist pretending to type. Brenda was nowhere to be seen. Then she saw Miller. He didn't knock. Just walked straight into the main conference room with a folder in his hand. Elena didn't move closer. She just watched. Every gesture inside told a story. The CEO standing too straight like posture could fix everything. Melissa pacing with her arms crossed. The moment the folder opened, she saw Prescott freeze. Not gradually, just stop. His mouth stopped moving, his shoulders sagged. Melissa backed up like she needed distance from the paper on the table. She looked like someone realizing the fine print had finally come due. Miller's voice was calm, but it carried. Violation of asset clearance protocol. Mishandling of encrypted material. At least 6 broken procedures, all signed off by your internal HR team. Even from this distance, Elena could see the color drain from Melissa's face. Then the words landed. Your eligibility for the government contract has been revoked. DSS will issue a full audit. Effective immediately. Prescott staggered back from the table like he'd been punched. Melissa sat down too fast and didn't get back up. No one spoke for a long time. Ross glanced at Elena. This is where they realized the iceberg wasn't a rumor. Elena said nothing. Just watched as Melissa's mouth moved without sound. She could guess what was being said, something like how or why or this isn't fair. But it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that the decision had come from above. And this time no one in that building could twist it. Miller stepped out a minute later, face as unreadable as ever. He nodded once at Ross, then at Elena. They've been notified. They understand. A few seconds later, Prescott came into view. His eyes were glassy. He didn't look at Elena like an employee anymore. He looked at her like someone holding a detonator he didn't understand. Melissa followed behind him, makeup smudged, her face hollow. Her hands were shaking. She tried to speak, but when her eyes met Elena's, she froze. There was nothing left to say. There never had been. Every time Melissa had pulled rank or masked spite behind faux professional smiles, she had unknowingly been laying the foundation for this exact moment. Elena didn't blink. Didn't gloat. She just watched. This wasn't payback. It wasn't vengeance. It was correction. Like gravity doing its job. Ross looked at her again. We'll need you to come in for a debrief in the next few days. We're assigning a new contractor to the project, but you'll be advising. If you're open to it. I am. The clearance you hold isn't something we hand out lightly, Ross continued. And what you did back there, keeping your head, staying quiet until it mattered, we noticed that too. Elena nodded once. Her throat felt tight, but not from emotion. From clarity. She'd been doubted, minimized, and discarded by people who never read past the surface. But the people who understood weight, the ones who handled actual responsibility, they'd been watching all along. Just as she turned to walk toward the sidewalk, Miller's phone buzzed. He looked down. 1 minute. He didn't explain. Just turned and walked back into the building. Ross stayed with Elena. Inside, everything seemed slower now. The panic had melted into dread. People were back at their desks but not working. They were watching Slack like it might warn them about the next aftershock. Elena stayed where she was, watching through the glass. Miller moved with purpose. No clipboard, no apology. He went straight to the fishbowl, where the execs were gathered again, this time with legal and IT clinging to the edges of the conversation like floaties in a flood. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw the impact. Miller dropped another file. Something about this one hit harder. Prescott's face changed. Not just concern this time, fear. His hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. Melissa looked like she might faint. Miller's voice was no longer quiet. His hand pointed, firm and final. Tiffany Hastings has been identified as the breach origin. Her credentials are now revoked. Melissa blinked rapidly, her mouth forming a word that didn't make it past the glass. Then she slumped into the nearest chair. Elena didn't move. There was nothing left for her to do but leave. The building was still standing, but the world inside had collapsed. And as Miller stepped back out and gave her a small nod, she knew she didn't need to stay a second longer. She turned, stepping off the curb. The sidewalk felt firmer under her feet than it ever had walking out of that building. Elena didn't rush, didn't linger. She just moved forward, her purse slung over her shoulder, the business card tucked safely inside. There was no triumphant music, no cinematic swell. Just her steps, steady and certain, the way they'd always been. Only now, people had finally noticed. Ross walked a few paces behind her. Not guarding. Not following. Just present. Like she understood what had just happened but respected Elena enough to let her process it in her own time. They made it halfway to the edge of the parking lot when Miller reappeared behind them. Elena, he called, voice calm but with something new in it, urgency maybe. Or finality. She stopped and turned. Yes. He didn't explain. Just said, walk with me, and headed back toward the building. Ross gave her a look, curious but not concerned, and nodded. I'll wait here. Elena followed Miller without asking questions. She didn't need to. She could feel it. Something else had fallen into place. A last piece of the mess they'd been trying to clean up. Something big enough that he wanted her to see it, or at least understand what had been hiding under the surface this whole time. Inside, the lobby was almost silent again. That eerie corporate silence after something seismic, where people sit at their desks pretending everything's fine, but all they're really doing is refreshing inboxes and watching for HR announcements. Miller walked straight through, past reception, past the assistants pretending to be busy. He opened the door to the fishbowl conference room without knocking. Elena stood just outside, watching. Prescott was inside, back at the head of the table, but he no longer looked like someone in charge. His tie was loosened. His face was pale. The folder Miller carried was already open, its pages splayed out in front of him like evidence in a courtroom. Melissa sat on the opposite end. Mascara streaked like ink lines on a ruined painting. She looked like someone who had finally run out of excuses. Miller's voice was low but clear. Not only was a cleared federal asset terminated without notifying the appropriate chain, he said, but your team also failed to revoke her classified access before attempting to access encrypted material on her workstation. Elena could see it on Prescott's face. The recognition, the panic, the slow understanding that this wasn't just a mistake. They had triggered a federal breach audit. There's got to be a clause, he said, scrambling. A waiver, a fix. This contract is everything. Miller didn't even blink. Your contract is now void. The DSS audit begins today. Your company is under review until further notice. Silence. Then the final hit. Tiffany Hastings has been flagged as the breach point. Her credentials are invalid as of this hour. Expect formal communication. Melissa looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under her. Her mouth opened but no words followed. She sank into her seat, blinking slowly, like she was still trying to believe it was real. Miller didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked back to the door, meeting Elena just outside. He gave her a small nod. They've been notified. She didn't ask what came next. She didn't need to. She knew. Behind him, Prescott stepped into view again. He looked at her like she held the trigger to something he never understood, but always feared. And maybe he was right, because she hadn't even done anything. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't made a scene. She had simply walked away and let the truth catch up. Melissa followed, her steps slow and uncertain. She couldn't even make eye contact now. The clipboard, the condescension, the smirking power gone. What remained was a hollow version of someone who had thought appearances were everything. Elena didn't look away. She didn't smile. She just stood there still. Not out of cruelty, but because this was the moment she had waited for. Not the destruction but the clarity. The reckoning. There had been no need to fight. The system had taken care of itself. She turned again and exited the building for the final time. The door shut behind her with a soft click. Almost too quiet for what it meant. No more boxes. No more exit interviews. Just the quiet weight of knowing she had done everything right. And that had been enough. Outside, Ross looked up as Elena returned. "All good?" she asked. Elena nodded. "They know now." Ross cracked a small smile. "You didn't flinch." "I didn't need to." They stood in silence for a moment, the breeze tugging gently at the hem of Elena's coat. "We subcontract oversight roles," Ross said, handing her a folded sheet of paper. It wasn't a formal offer yet, just the first door. Especially when a primary contractor is compromised. Elena unfolded it, skimmed the contents. There were no promises, just an invitation. "I assume the pay is better?" she asked. Ross gave a tiny shrug. "More direct. Cleaner. Saner maybe. But you already know what you're doing. We like people who stay quiet until it's time to be heard." Elena folded the paper and tucked it in her purse alongside the card. "Give us a call next week," Ross said. "You're the kind of person we don't like to lose track of." Elena didn't respond. She didn't need to. She walked to her car, each step easy now. No tension in her shoulders. No weight on her chest. Just space finally. She didn't look back. The sun had started breaking through the clouds as Elena reached her car. It wasn't warm yet, but the air had that clean, cleared-out feeling that follows a storm. She unlocked the door, tossed her bag gently onto the passenger seat, and slid behind the wheel. For a moment she just sat there, hands resting on her thighs, eyes forward. No tears came. Not because she wasn't emotional, but because there was nothing left to mourn. Whatever that job had once been, it had stopped being hers a long time ago. She had just been too professional to admit it. Inside the building, the panic was probably still unfolding. HR scrambling to get ahead of formal audits. Legal trying to draft statements they should have written months ago. Managers realizing their golden contract was now dust. It was strange to think about. That while she sat here, calmly breathing, everything they had built on image and arrogance was coming undone at the seams. And she hadn't lifted a finger to make it happen. All she had done was the work. Properly. Quietly. And now that silence had spoken louder than any protest ever could. She reached into her purse and pulled out the DSS card. The name on it was printed clean, no job title, just authority without noise. She ran her thumb across the watermark seal. Felt real. Solid. Earned. That was what today had been about, really. The difference between pretending to have power and actually carrying it. For years, Elena had kept her head down, followed the rules, done more than what was asked. And she had been mocked for it, overlooked, dressed down literally, for not playing along with the company's performative nonsense. They never asked what she did. They never understood what she held. Until the moment they couldn't afford not to. She thought of Prescott's face, his voice cracking under pressure, trying to offer her a raise, a title, a desk, as if he could buy back her trust like it was something on clearance. She thought of Melissa, the smug smiles turned slack, the clipboard gone, the voice now unsure. They hadn't fired her. They had freed her. The irony was, they thought they were punishing her for her pants. They had no idea she was the only thing keeping their biggest deal stitched together. And when they let her go, they tore it all open. Her phone buzzed once. A calendar alert she hadn't turned off yet. Team huddle for 30 p.m. The same meeting that used to drag on for an hour just to hear Prescott talk about synergy like it was a religion. She chuckled under her breath and dismissed the notification. Then she adjusted the rearview mirror, took one last glance at the building behind her, and let herself feel it. Not satisfaction exactly, but something colder. Something cleaner. Like watching a broken system fall under its own weight. She hadn't sabotaged them. She hadn't leaked anything. She just walked away. And it turned out that was enough. Because real authority doesn't throw tantrums or write angry emails. Real authority doesn't need attention. It just waits until the moment it's needed, and then moves. And today it had moved through her. She didn't know what came next exactly. But she knew one thing. She wasn't going back. Not to cubicles that stank of microwave lunches and fake concern. Not to leadership that confused compliance with control. Not to pretending that invisible labor didn't hold everything together. Agent Ross had said they needed people who understood protocol. People who stayed quiet until it mattered. People who knew how to hold chaos by the throat and never flinch. That was Elena. That had always been Elena. The difference now was someone else finally saw it. She slipped the DSS card into the same pocket where she kept her badge. The badge that was no longer tied to that company or that desk. Now it meant something bigger. Something permanent. Then she started the engine. No slow motion goodbye. No lingering stare at the glass lobby doors. Just the hum of a car ready to go and a woman who had already decided not to look back. Let them rebuild. Let them spin the story. Let them wonder what she's doing now. And how she's sleeping at night. Spoiler. Like someone who didn't just survive the fire, but walked out of it clean. She followed the rules. She kept her head down. She did her job better than anyone else. But when office politics turned petty, they fired her over a dress code violation. Without realizing she was the only one holding their $50 million contract together. What happened next? The federal government stepped in. And the people who tried to humiliate her got a front row seat to their own downfall. This isn't just a story about corporate betrayal. It's about quiet strength, professional dignity, and what happens when the person you underestimate turns out to be the one with real power. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed for doing the right thing, this story is for you.